Dc50 Bookworms, soul-touching and life-enhancing stories. Bookworms. Riacoma was a flourishing planet for many centuries until the inhabitants lost their respect and care, depleting most of the natural resources, consuming the health of the planet, including their own. The warning signs had been there for decades, but when the black moon started to permanently be in front of the sun, it was too late. Just before the sunlight disappeared, wars and diseases wiped out most of the inhabitants. A group of inhabitants, which called themselves the Keepers of Light, had seen this coming and had been preparing for the worst. They had built an underground village around an underground lake and had stocked warehouses with their total food bars that could nourish them for centuries. The decision had not been to take any other modern technology with them, as it had been a great part of the downfall, with the exception of their Light on Life books. Libraries had been erected, which would be functioning as the remaining memory of the world that once was, and the head librarian would be the leader of the community. The books would be their light, because all the books written on their planet had been printed on a special material with a luminous ink. So each book had a double function, as it gave light when you opened it, and of course it had content one could read, and thus offering light on life, or differently said, offering information about various subjects of life. Shelter, food and water was taken care of, and now, a century after the big blackout, everybody was mainly busy with reading, for it was their main source of experiencing life. Many sections and endless books kept life in the library and community going, and this was the life that was known to them, and nobody questioned that life anymore, because that's all what they knew. They were bookworms. Meanwhile, the village had grown into a city they named Inner Light, and what once were sections on different subjects in the library had now become suburbs in which citizens lived. To have light during the day, books had been attached to the buildings that were opened during the day, and during the night they were closed again. Books at eye level were used for reading as well in the different suburbs. There was, however, one major problem. The luminous ink and the books, like everything and everybody, had also a lifespan. The light in many books had started to fade according to the allotted life they had, but the citizens didn't want to think about it too much, and in the beginning they had the privilege as there were plenty of books. It was, however, an important fact because their life depended on the light of the books. Another blackout was inevitable at one point in time, because new books were not in production as the ink and machinery didn't make it underground. In the meantime, life in the city continued. Ariata lived in the suburb named Asla, in which everybody read about artistic subjects, and the books that gave light had been attached to the buildings in the most artistic ways. Asla was also for those studying different professions, and many had been in service to erect this city. In their suburb, chairs were standing by the books that were attached to the building for those who liked studying outdoors. The crews of professional workers in the city changed almost every day. Most of these professionals, after acquiring one profession, were not happy after a while and started reading books about other skills and trades, and some just kept on learning without ever doing anything except reading. Some who did stay with one profession kept on studying endless books regarding their profession, some eager to learn more, and others feeling that the more they knew, the lesser they understood. Some became perfectionists, and in the end possibly going insane, which also was a danger for Ariata. The suburb circa was for the romancers, reading romantic stories. Some tried the real experience, but nobody ever seemed to be content going through a relationship. It was too challenging and too difficult. Very quickly they returned to reading and stayed with the imaginary experience, which often as well ended with tears of joy or broken hearts. Crimsa was for those reading crime and horror, and although there was almost no crime in this suburb, for jail and punishment was avoided, the reading had still an inner and personal effect on the reader, and many were self-destructive. Historia was for those reading about history, but forgetting to experience their own life in the moment by constantly being in the past. Sisha was for the scientists, who were completely absorbed in research. Medica was for those learning about medical and alternative medical treatments. This suburb had many rehab centers as many individuals became addicted to not just reading, but reading about one subject only, or for those getting insane, reading too much. The readers and students of medicine, like the artists and other professionals, didn't last too long in the field because the reality needing to take care of others was too hard, or they felt that they needed to know more. Ligia was for those studying religion and philosophy, and after the first decades, which ended up in ritual debates, everybody returned to merely reading about these subjects. The buildings of different faith groups looked very invasive, as they all had their entire outside walls covered with the book of their faith. It was a way of trying to win followers, but mostly it was about trying to discriminate other belief systems. Verbal debates had their history, and voices had become silent, just like crime in the beginning of life, there, down deep, beneath the planet's surface. Of course, there were many other suburbs, with many different subjects and citizens busy with reading about them, and it felt that most of them were looking for something that was missing inside of them, and their thirst was seemingly never quenched. As everybody depended on light, everybody walked around with a book folded open, so it could give light in areas where there was no or little light, or open books would be laying around giving light to give more light to a bigger environment. But most of the time individuals would be just reading books and giving their light. Everybody talked at times about the world up and above them, but nobody dared to go there. And at the same time it was forbidden, as poisonous gases could enter and endanger their entire existence. Sansuya, a 13th generation lightsaber, since an early age, just like anybody else, became a bookworm. Life was about reading, and reading was life. However, she felt that there was something else, and it started with reading magical stories, and always discovering a deeper meaning inside of them. Then she went through a period in which every book was boring, and often just jumped to the last page to find a disappointing ending. When she got older, she lived in almost every suburb, and every subject had felt familiar to her, and in the beginning this had been exciting, but after some time it became just another confrontation of familiarity. She realized that everything written, but also their entire existence, was just about concepts and descriptions, and all of them were incomplete. They were just ideas somebody had started to play with, and then they got written down. They all were a truth, but not the full truth. So there was something missing, and she realized that others felt this as well, but they kept searching in and reading books. In her mind, that which felt missing had nothing to do with the mind or intellect, because all that information could be written down. And for that reason, The special books were called Light on Life books. They revealed nothing new, but things that had been there already, all the time inside the mind. Reading for her became a second priority and started to be still and hoping to find some answers in the stillness. And so Sanshia continued her quest. In her mind, that something that felt missing was also not from the world from before the big blackout. Why going back to something which was proven to be destructive? And the question arose if the life in inner light really had something to offer, because here too everybody was living in darkness and self-destructive in one way or another. In addition, she was very aware of the fact that one day a blackout would come, and sooner than later, as she noticed the slight fading of lights in books. One day she thought that she was getting to some answers. Had it to do with light? She was thinking. Was it the last memory not about a light that had gone behind the black moon? Were they not living in the city called Inner Light? Why were they called the Keepers of Light? And what about the books called Light on Life books? Was it that obvious? One day, wandering around in one of the suburbs, she noticed the simple dwelling, and she peeped through the window and saw more light than usual. She was unable to adjust her eyes to this immense light and knocked at the door, but nobody answered. Just before she wanted to leave, she noticed a stand with books, and each book was titled Everlasting Light, and a sign which read, Free Books. Later, back at her home, she opened the book, and to her surprise, when she opened the book, there was no light and no text, just black pages, blank pages, black and blank pages. Also strange was the fact that the book had only 5 pages. Many times during the following days she kept opening the book, but the pages stayed black and empty. She went to every library and suburb, but nobody ever heard about this book or title. During the following weeks she went many times back to the same dwelling, but there seemed to be never anybody at home, and the light inside kept being so bright that Sansuya could not even peep through the window, as it was too much for her eyes. The only thing left to do was being busy with the Everlasting Light book. She often wondered if there was some magic in this book, or if it had some answers to her questions. As she had no real interest anymore with any book or subject, she made it into a habit to stare into the black book pages, and opening it continuously from page 1 to 5 and back again, and doing this over and over again. It became such a habit that after some time she even didn't notice that she was turning the pages anymore. She just kept on staring into the black pages. She could sense something, but didn't know what, but staring many hours on the black and blank pages brought her some inner peace. One day she went back again to the dwelling, and the immense light was not present, but just a very little light. She knocked at the door, and to her surprise, an elderly gentleman opened the door and invited her to come inside. She, like anybody else, always carried a book, which could be opened at places where there was very little light or no light. That's what she did in order to light up the place. There were no books anywhere, except for one old, light, fading Light of Life book, and one closed, Everlasting Light book, which was placed in the middle of the table in the middle of the room. The man introduced himself as Lumière, and after sitting on the table, a conversation started between the both of them. Sansuya, you are blessed with the fact that you have discovered that all knowledge is already inside of you. You are blessed that all these subjects inside the Light on Life books are not of interest to you anymore. You are blessed that you are seeking for something that is real and not from the world of concepts and descriptions. You are blessed that you can sit still and can watch in the darkness of the blank and black pages. You are blessed that some peace has entered your being. How do you know these things about me? Once you start seeing more light, you can see more. So, I was right that everybody, including myself, is looking for some kind of light. It had nothing to do with the Light on Life books, and I also see none of them in your home. But what about the Everlasting Life books? These books have been around for centuries, and anybody seeking everlasting light will run into one. Many individuals encountered an everlasting light book before the last blackout and turned inside. Others died in darkness, and your ancestors took a detour and tried to find life here underground. You know now that it is inevitable for another blackout to come. And just like with the last one, it will not end with a total extinction, but life will become much harder. I know one thing that will definitely come, and that is death for each individual. And to not end up in total darkness, one must seek that inner light. A light which is the essence of each and every one, and which is the essence of everything. Everything is born out of that everlasting light, and everything must return one day to that light. But one must be prepared and trained to become one with that light again. It is a slow process of first discovering that light and then to get used to that light which keeps growing. Is that the reason I could not look into your room? Correct, because I have been practicing for years and will have to continue in order to merge with the source. You were home all these times? I knocked at your door, and was this also the reason that I could not see you? You were staring into your everlasting light book, in which you seemingly have discovered that light? That is correct. But you also noticed that I do not need as much light as you do, because I am seeing slowly that light in everybody and everything. Everything is slowly turning into light. But can anybody do this? Of course. Just like all knowledge and all information in the Light on Life books is in everybody, so is that light as well. We are just in the way, but once you start getting attracted and attached to this everlasting light, everything else, including oneself, fades. So finding that light is most essential in order to survive better when the blackout comes. But more important is to be attached to it, for when your physical life will be over. So continue to practice your page turning and looking in the darkness of the blank pages, and trust that one day a light will appear, a light that will guide you to more light. When will that happen? That depends on one's load connected to the world and the addictions and attachments connected to the world. So practice in peace and without expectation, and be a light to others while still moving about in the world. Be light and be a light, and life will be lighter, and one day you will start seeing that light and being in that light. Life of mind and body and the external world are just shadows, or better said, a moon in front of an everlasting sun. Sansuya continued her life in the city, And while the lights of the book slowly started to fade, she was blessed to see more light inside the everlasting book, and kept on training and preparing herself to merge completely into that everlasting light before her physical life would be over. When she was able to see the first light, all her questions disappeared in an instant. But when she needed encouragement on the path, she visited the man in his simple dwelling, who she called Lumière, the guiding light. What the story could bring us. Light always has played a very important part in places of worship. Light has been pictured around enlightened beings, and it has been described in scriptures and many books. This light, however, is still light we can see, visualize, and can think of, and thus still something of the world of body, mind, and matter. The real light, or light essence, or essence of light, that is the source and essence of and within everything and everyone, is from beyond the world of body, mind, and matter, and possibly a light searching for.